Said I wanted to talk separately about the material that's in week 6 here, and it's primarily about corporate culture, uh, the ideas of vision and values, ideas of leadership, how corporate cultures are formed, how they exhibit their tremendous power on the actions of individuals, and how leaders can influence and manage and maybe direct the activities of what goes on. And this is something I've had a lot of experience in with the strategic planning and strategic thinking side of this issue. And I bring that up because for one thing, I think it's the foundation of strategy, is this whole idea of vision and values and mission. And also, it's very fresh in my mind because I've actually been working on a couple of projects and doing some writing about the issue in the last couple of weeks. So it's very very top of mind with me right now. But when it comes to business ethics, really we have to think back as to what people see and what people hear and what people understand is they really don't know our motives. They don't know our beliefs. The only things that they know is what they see us or our organizations do. They see our behaviors. And so the question becomes what informs our behaviors, what directs our behaviors, what controls our behaviors. And in many cases, particularly when we're talking about business and we're talking about ethical issues, it's the culture of the corporation. A lot of you saw this back when we did the Enron case. You know, when we finally said, "Hey, the culture of that company was one is of make the numbers, make the numbers, make the numbers. Let's not care what happens." Okay. Um, a lot of you have commented in the discussion boards when we asked for examples of really ethical companies, and you started talking about companies that seem to just uh, behave in a way that said, "Hey, this is a culture that we have." For instance, in the examples of great customer service that people talked about, would say, "Well, we value our customers, and they come first, and that's what we do, and that's what we are seen as doing when we take care of them." So it's a very, very critical item when it comes to ethics. And for me, the whole idea is that when you notice in the PowerPoint that companies, the chapter this week, very early on, there's a little triangular document and a triangular diagram where it talks about vision, values, and mission, and those being the foundation of what's in an organization. And vision is kind of like what we want to become. Mission is our strategic operating goal, and values are the principles that underlie that. And I think that's really the essence of coming up with an ethical culture, is if an organization has values, and the values are held by the senior leadership of the organization, and that those people in those positions of leadership live by those values, mirror those values, enforce those values, it becomes really more than just an ethical and moral thing. It almost becomes a resource allocation tool. You don't have time to worry about things that are outside that value set, and you just don't, and you don't commit any resources to even thinking or considering doing something that's outside of your way of doing it. So it can be a very hard-edged business tool also. But the simplest point I wanted to make about when can you recognize if something is a value to a corporation or to an individual. And notice I said a value, not of value. And there's a big difference. Is that if we consider something an ethical principle and moral value, this is something that cannot be compromised for financial gain. Okay, so everything we've looked at up to now, all these methods of decision making, we talk about utilitarian approaches and universalist approaches, and we talk about rights, and we talk about doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people. This is all very easily talked about when we're talking about somebody else. Now we have to look inward at our corporations, at our organizations, and at ourselves and say, look, when push comes to shove, how do we behave? So if I say that something is important, that we won't cheat in some way, and then the opportunity to make an extra couple $1,000,000 shows up, but we just have to bend the rules a little bit to do it. Well, what happens? There's an old saying that everybody has their price. Is that true? I don't know. One would hope it isn't, but I think a lot of my experiences, in many cases, has shown me otherwise. What I guess I'm trying to say is that if something is really of value, a deeply held value, that's something that cannot be compromised for financial gain. We are not going to take an action just because it's going to make us more money. Okay? It's very simple. Boy, is it very difficult to do. I mean, this is the classic case of something being simple but not easy. And the problem is when leadership says one thing and does another, then that's when you have chaos, and that's when the value system breaks down. So many of our companies, so many of our leaders, so many of us as individuals say one thing and do another. And don't think for a minute that people don't see that. They see through us like they see through a glass window. You can't hide it for too long. Folks at Enron found out. And the problem is, once that breaks down, then trust breaks down, then all sorts of business consideration breaks down, and you've got really a big problem. Try to get that back once you've lost it. Not a very easy thing to do, is it? So what we really want people to look at this week when the material talks about behavior, culture, for instance, when you go into an organization, how do you know how to behave? Well, we pass out codes of conduct and we have orientations for employees and everything, but really, how do we learn how to behave in our organizations? We go to work every day and we look around us and we see how other people behave and we see how the leaders behave, and pretty soon we begin to behave in that way. I have often said, and I will continue to say, that it's the unwritten rules in an organization that are far more powerful, far more influential than the written rules. And we all know that everywhere we work, every place we go, everything that we're part of, from our businesses to our social groups, to our families, to our churches, to our children's friends and everything, there's all those are groups, right? And they all have unwritten rules just as well as the written rules. And I'm going to wager that in just about every case, those unwritten rules are the more powerful ones. So I think really what we're asking people to look at is, in this week's material, both the written rules, codes of ethics, codes of behavior, visions, statements of values. Those are all generally very positive. And then to look and compare the behaviors of those organizations and the members of those organizations, and above all, the leaders of those organizations, with those written rules, and see if there's consistency. This is a very important week. This material may be some of the most important in the whole course. I hope you take a lot of time with it. Really be careful with it. If you have any questions, please ask me or ask each other on the discussion board, because this is one I think that we're going to get a lot out of. This is where we've seen a lot of trouble. This is where we've seen a lot of news articles. And it happens on such a wide scale that the difference is between, this is the old do as I say, not as I do. But in most organizations, we find that people do as you do and not as you say. And this is something very important to watch for. Okay? because we want to get to the point where we understand why we're doing NX consistently with our articulated values and our articulated ethical philosophies. And this is where we begin to look at the differences and how things really work. Okay, thanks very much.